Welcome to World Club of the Week. No, we're not wearing the same thing as last week. We just skipped a week, and so we're recording right after we recorded Racing. This is actually show number 2.
I honestly thought about changing shirts just to avoid that. But
I thought about wearing a different hat. I did think about that. I was like, that'll be easy. It will not be weird. But yeah, we do have other clothes. So
nope, just this World Cup shirt.
Yeah. This week we are going to talk about another SC like we did the first week. So that's exciting. This time though, it's at the front. It's SC Internacional. No idea if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Don't speak a lick of Portuguese. This is a Brazilian club, so it is going to be in Portuguese. Although there are some interesting, it's a little bit more than just Portuguese. So, Evan, you picked this club. We're rotating weeks. So why'd you pick this one?
Well, so I picked this one because I didn't want to go. I wanted to stay kind of out of mainstream, and I mean, I guess to some people this might be mainstream, but for me, it's definitely not. But this was the youth club or the home club of Alison Becker, who's currently the goalkeeper at Liverpool, the main team that I follow. And I had recently heard I think it was on a podcast. I can't remember what podcast it was, but I heard somewhere that the Brazilian media does not like Alisson, and they would much prefer Ederson to be the number one goalkeeper for the Brazilian national team. And they speculated at why, like, the Brazilian media doesn't like Alisson. And one of the things that they said was that he's not like a typical German. He's not from one of the main cities. I mean, I think he's from Porto Alegre, which is where SC International is located.
I think you meant not a typical Brazilian.
That's what I meant. Sorry about that. Okay. I was getting into
I knew where you were going. Yes. Yeah, but
yes, he's not the typical Brazilian. Sorry, and Ederson seems to fit more of what that mainstream Brazilian looks like. Alisson is he's a good-looking man, which was funny that the couple of these dudes said that. But that's one thing. He's a good-looking. He's not from one of the main cities where most of all of the other Brazilian soccer players are from, and he has some roots from immigrants.
Is it really that he's good-looking, or is it just that he's like white?
Okay, that might be fair.
I mean, I don't know. But
he's well put together. I don't know.
It seems like having like good-looking players on your team would be like good for media. Like people would want to watch. They don't. I mean, unless.
I think the Brazilians maybe not like good-looking players, but they want the game to be beautiful. I don't know. I don't know about that, but
if you know, put it in the comments, people. Tell us we're dumb because we don't. We don't know. I mean, like,
we really don't. But I said Alisson was from Porto Alegre. He's actually born in Novo Hamburgo, which is literally New Hamburg. I probably cannot pronounce that correctly in Portuguese, but which is definitely from German descent in that town name. So he's in a very German area of Brazil, and that's probably why the Brazilian media has been kind of down on him. And so all of that made me think, well, why not pick the club that he's from to see if kind of the Brazilian media feels the same way about this club that they do about Alisson himself.
All right. So how is this team? I mean, they lost, obviously, or the player, Alisson, has grown in to be one of the best keepers in the world. How have they done replacing him? And I'm sure, like a lot of Brazilian clubs, they're losing players all the time. So how's that working out for them now?
Well, let me start with that second point. As far as I know, and we just did a show with about Argentinian teams or an Argentinian club, but as far as I know, Brazilian teams, they sell their players way before they reach their prime to try to reap in the profits of them instead of letting them flourish in their own in Brazil. And so I think that kind of happened with Alisson himself. Was he was good at SC International, but they sold him on very quickly, and now he's one of, if not the best goalkeeper in the world. Um, so this last season, the 2008 season, they finished third, and that was just after being promoted from the year before. So they had been relegated, and then they got promoted, and then the season right after their promotion, they finished third. So I don't know necessarily how good that is without seeing the table in front of me. Was it a close third? Was it a far third? Who was in front of them? I don't know those things, but yeah, coming off of a relegation's not too good. But then they immediately won back their promotion. So I don't know what was going on with that relegation year. If that was directly because they were selling like Alisson and some other players, or if some other things happened, financial crisis, something. But third sounds pretty good if they can maintain that for this upcoming season.
So we talked about the 2018 season, which I guess is not super current because it's 2019, but current enough.
Well, I don't think they've started 2019 season yet. I think.
Yeah. So there you go.
So.
Yeah, a tidbit I didn't know. So let's jump back more than a century and talk about the founding, because this is actually an interesting piece of this. I mean, foundings are probably often interesting, but this is an interesting piece.
Yeah,
for sure.
I imagine they usually are interesting, but this
unless it's an MLS side or like an A-League side. Probably the Chinese clubs are not very interesting. Rich man decided he wanted a club. Now there's a club. That's that story. But anyway, that's not this story.
No. And so back in oh man, let me see what these years are exactly. But in the very early 1900s, 1901, there was this Italian family, or Italian descendants, I should say. There were three of them, and they wanted to join basically a football club or team at the time. And when they moved, they were in Sao Paulo, and I'm assuming there was football to be played in Sao Paulo, but they moved from Sao Paulo to Porto Alegre in 1901, and the problem that they had was they couldn't find a club that would let them play football because of their Italian descent. At that time, there was only two clubs in the city. There was Foosball, and then there was Grêmio, which is still around today. Grêmio is. I don't know about the Foosball team. That's a very German name, and I don't know if it's there or not. But that's neither here nor there. Here or there. Wow. Anyway, both of those were private clubs, and both of them were for those of German ancestry, and these guys are of Italian descent, so they were not allowed to play. And so it took them some time. It says 1908, so about an 8-year gap from when they moved to Porto Alegre to when they started. They convened. They got a group of students together who I guess probably were not all of German descent, and they formed their own club, which thus became Sport Club Internacional. So it was made from Brazilians with Italian descendants, which was really funny to me because we've talked about this, how I took German and spoke German, and how I chose SC International when I should have probably actually chosen Grêmio because that was of German descent, or I guess ancestry. I don't know what the correct word is to use there. They were created with those with German ancestral heritage, and probably should have.
I think those words are like the same.
All pretty much. Same. Yeah, I don't know. But anyway, we did it, so maybe we'll do that later. Who knows? But yeah, that's how they were formed.
Sweet. So, we got 100, and this is the 110-year anniversary. I guess April 4th will be 110 years since the founding. In that time, what notable players and coaches have come through?
Well, I tried looking, and I'm probably not very well cultured in famous players, just because I guess I only recently got, I say recently, meaning I'm not 110 years old. And I probably didn't really start following international soccer until I was about around 15 or 16. So give me about like 10 years of history here is all I can really tell you about. But I know some of the famous players from the past, like the main ones, but some of them are probably famous and I missed them. So I just picked out players that I knew. There's just obviously Alisson, who's now at Liverpool. Um, Alexandre Pato, who I can't remember what years he played for the club, but I believe he had some national team call ups, which I remember his name. So that struck out to me. And then they had,
he was supposed to be the next big thing, and he never
yeah,
quite made it there. But yeah, he played for AC Milan for sure. I don't remember who else, but
yeah. And then they had, going back even further, they had Paulo Roberto Falcao, which Falcao is a very famous, I shouldn't say famous soccer name. It is a famous soccer name, but it's a very common name as well.
He's a very famous player himself.
Yeah,
so
he is. Like, probably when you mention the name Falcao to most people who know a lot more about soccer than I do, they probably think of him before they think of current or more modern Falcaos that have.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously the guy that played for Manchester United and Chelsea. It would depend on context, I think, probably which one that you were talking about, because that Falcao is, and it's I can't remember if it's the Colombian or if it's the Brazilian Portuguese, but it's actually got like an N in it. It's like Falcão or something like that. I think that might be the Brazilian. So this guy's name is actually like Falcão, if I'm remembering correctly. But yeah, I mean, he's Colombian, not Brazilian. So, and obviously there's like, 30 years in between their careers. So context would probably tell you which one. But yeah, he's a super big name. Brazilian. Yeah.
Well, he's a midfielder and came up into Internacional at 1972. At least according to Wikipedia, that's the first club he was with. So I haven't delved deeper in to see if he was anywhere else before that. But he made 158 appearances, scored 22 goals, and then he went on to Roma for about 5 or 6 seasons. And then he came back to Brazil and played for Sao Paulo for a year or two. But in that stretch, he played for the Brazilian national team for about 10 years, making 34 appearances and scoring 6 goals during that time. And since then, after he retired playing, he has managed the Brazil national team, and he has come to manage Internacional on 3 separate occasions.
And that appearance number is not going to sound high to a modern listener, but you have to remember the World Cup was like 16 teams at the time. If it wasn't 16, it was 24, but I think it was 16 at the time. And travel was more expensive, like there weren't as many friendlies and things like that. So, and also, did he play in Europe, Falcao?
Yeah, he played in Roma.
Okay, yeah. So he even if there were friendlies in Brazil, he probably wasn't leaving Europe to go back to play in friendlies, like, because now like people do that all the time, but it probably wasn't the case. And again, if I'm wrong, comments, but certainly like the amount of games that you would have played in the World Cup, and then there was no Confederations Cup, didn't exist then, so there were just fewer games.
One little caveat to that is the World Cup was in 1982 was in Spain, while he was playing in Europe. So that was probably a good transition for him. He didn't have to travel very far. He could play in the 1982 World Cup without having to fly across the world like some of these other players probably had to do.
Yeah, for sure. And then they won in 82, right? Argentina was 78, 86. I'm pretty sure they won in 82. Italy won it. Oh, okay. They that 82 side was like really good though. So anyway, all right, back on the train here. So we talked a little bit about this already, at least in their current form. But what about International's past successes and failures?
Well, I guess we can start going back again. These are just mentioned from pulled from Wikipedia, so there's obviously some chance that some of these are inaccurate or things have been missed because neither of us speak Portuguese, neither of us have been to Brazil, so we don't really know these things. In their entirety. But one thing that was interesting to me before we jump into this was that the Brazil didn't really have a national league until 1959. So any record from before that, any title they might have had before 1959, like wasn't really a Brazilian national championship or league title. So they might have had some other things, but they won their three league titles in the 70s and 75, 76, and 79. And then they won the Copa do Brasil in 1992. And those are their only national successes. But since then, they have had a lot of international success, which is really strange to me how they haven't really won much inside of Brazil. But outside of Brazil, they've won the Copa Libertadores twice, the Copa Sudamericana in 2008, the Recopa Sudamericana, which I don't know what that is, but they've won that twice. And then in 2006, they won the FIFA Club World Cup by beating Barcelona in the finals. I think that score was 1-0, but I can't remember. So a lot of international success in the 2000s, which is really strange to me because they didn't win anything in Brazil in that time. But since then, in about 2011, they won the Recopa Sudamericana. But since then, in 2016, they were relegated for the first time in their history. And as I mentioned earlier, the next season in 2017, they won back their promotion, and then they finished third. So really strange stuff, some ups and some downs throughout the years. I think they usually finish pretty high in the league. Just not able to win anything since, in the league since 1979. So it's been 40 years. It's a really long time.
Yeah, I noticed that you wrote 30 years in here and that you corrected yourself.
Yeah. I don't know what I was thinking there. I think I was going from the 70s to the 2000s when they had their international success. But sure. They haven't won the league in 40 years, which is quite some time.
For sure. So this is something that I don't think we talked about with Racing, and we definitely. Oh yeah, we did talk about this in for the Atlanta because there was this thing that we'd never heard of. There was like the Southeast I-85. I don't even remember what it was called, but we were just like, we lived like 3 hours from here, and we've never heard of this thing. So just. We're going to say it, and then you can promptly forget it. But this one, they actually have a real derby. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, it's called the Portuguese. I don't know exactly how these syllables are pronounced, supposed to be pronounced, but the Grey-Nall derby with Grêmio. And it is basically those are the two main teams in Porto Alegre. So anytime that they get together, it's just a clash within the city.
So it's the Gray from Grêmio, or Gray, I guess, from Grêmio, and then the Nall, which is the last syllable in Internacional. I mean, that's, I'm assuming.
Yes,
people are trying to visualize this.
Yes, that's correct. And I don't know how the Brazilian calendar works. When we were talking about Argentina, those teams, like, they play once a year, which is strange to me coming from like a European background.
They play once a season,
yes,
I think.
Yes.
But there are 2 seasons every year.
I don't know if that's still the case in Argentina.
It used to be the case.
Yeah, it sometimes is and sometimes isn't. It's weird. But in Brazil, I don't.
Argentine football, we didn't go into this because we could have been talking for like hours. Yeah. Argentine football is super weird. Yeah. But the Brazilians, they still have that regional league. They never, even when they went to a national league, they never are. So like you can see like in like the big clubs, it's not like in England where they have like Conference North and Conference South. Like the big clubs still play in this, like maybe it's just a regional tournament, but they still have it. And it's kind of the big clubs don't take it seriously because it's like they're playing against like amateur sides and stuff.
Yeah.
And it's not like the FA Cup where like they sort of weed all of that out first. But anyway, yeah, well, I'm sure we'll talk more about Argentine football in other shows. So now we're in Brazil.
Yeah, and I don't know much about it. It's always interesting when you have two teams that are very close to one another. They play and they're both pretty good consistently. It's always heated. This one is considered one of the most fiercest in-city football rivalries inside of Brazil, and so therefore one of the world's biggest rivalries. And going back to what we talked about with the Argentina teams, is there's probably just a lot more passion in this than there is probably in some of the European derbies of today, and so you probably get to see some real crunching tackles and some passion from the fans and the players that you might not necessarily get in like the Manchester Derby. Obviously, the Manchester Derby is very heated, but those players are from multiple different countries, so it's usually just the fan bases that are very heated at one another. And even so, when you go to the games, they're very pricey in England and in Europe. So this is probably the atmosphere of this derby is probably very intense because fans from both teams are there. Everybody comes, and it's just I don't want to say a bloodbath because it's probably not that fierce, but it's probably very intense, which would make it a very good soccer game or football match to watch.
So there are 26 teams in Argentine football. So that may be one reason why that in the top division. I mean,
and it was up to like 28 like a couple seasons ago. So
last season it was 28. I was trying to figure out how many games that they played. So yeah, last year they played 27 games. So they played every team once.
And they have this thing where some years they play like their rival twice, but they haven't done that the past two seasons. It's
so. They changed the format in 2014 to be this like one game thing. I don't know. If you want to know more about Argentine football, just type in Argentine Primera División into the Wikipedias, and then you can read all about it. You can see their history. And you can do the same thing with the Brazilian league if you want to find out more about that. And like Evan said, we're probably going to be doing Grêmio at some point. Next week, you have picked a Chilean team, though, if I'm looking at the calendar correctly.
Yes, I picked Universidad de Chile, which I'm going to go ahead and talk about why just a little bit.
We'll save that for next week.
Okay, all right. Cliffhanger.
Yeah, we're staying in South America at least for one more week there. So, cool. Well, I will ask you the same thing that I asked our guest Darren in the Argentine show. Is there anything else that you didn't put on our little board that you want to mention about Internacional before we go?
Maybe not about Internacional, but just the talk of this week and the show we just did. It got me really interested in watching some football from some other countries that maybe I can't necessarily watch easily with the cable package I currently have. But being able to find some games that are of a different variety from what I'm used to, where like it's not so profit business based, it's more raw passion in the fan bases and in the players themselves. And getting in there and getting to actually watch these teams instead of just reading about them and seeing how their results have gone, just to see like their style of play, the atmospheres, the stadiums. I'm really interested now to do that. That's something I'm going to look forward to doing over the next few weeks or few months.
So I will say this because it might to you now on camera because it might be useful for our listeners as well. I get, and you may get as well, Univision, not the Univision Deportes, but just regular Univision. They have a lot of Mexican League games. Now, I don't think the Mexican League is by any stretch of the imagination going to get you away from the commercial aspect of football. If anything, it's worse than the EPL, but it is another league that's, you know, has different histories and such than the EPL. If you're looking for something else and you're in the US, it's likely that you get Univision. So, you know, like just the regular one. And it's not like you can just flip it on and there's always going to be football on. You're going to have to like actually like look at the calendar and stuff, which might be more effort than you're willing to put in. But, you know, the game, they're in our time zone. So like, just like Saturday night is when games are. So it's like, it's not actually that hard, you know, like Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday, like just flip the Univision, see if there's a game. If you want to check something out. And like I'm starting to watch those games just to try to learn Spanish. So my wife likes to joke that, they're just going to say goal, and I already know what that means. So, but I think they might say a little bit more than that. So, but anyway, so I hope you have enjoyed our sort of Western Hemisphere discussion that we have had this time on the World Club of the Week. As we mentioned, we'll continue that Western Hemisphere focus. We haven't moved out of the Western Hemisphere in our 4 weeks, but next week with the Universidad de Chile. So we'll see you next week on the World Club of the Week.